One of the fundamental things that any programming language must support is the ability to do something conditional. So our flowchart says we make a decision. We evaluate some condition, and if that condition is true, we want to do this statement. If it's not, we don't. So sometimes we do this, and sometimes we don't. That's a conditional control flow. In C, we have the if statement to provide that control flow, to express that control flow. So this is the syntax of the if statement. If, parentheses, expression, close parentheses, statement. And the meaning of this statement is if we evaluate this expression, and if the value is true, and by true we mean non-zero, then we execute the statement. Otherwise, we don't execute the statement. And that's all there is to it. A couple of examples. If A greater than B. So A greater than B is an expression. It uses the relational operator greater than. So we evaluate this expression. We load A, we load B, we compare them, and we decide whether that's true or false. If it's true, we execute this statement. Subtract B from A and store the result back into A. If it's false, we don't do this and we move on to the next thing in the program. If we want to do more than one thing as a result of a condition being true, the if statement only gives us one statement, but we know that we can replace any statement. We can use a compound statement with curly braces to accomplish that. So here, if 1's greater than 10, that's our expression. If it's true, we do everything in these braces because this is one statement. It's a compound statement. We do this, subtract 10, we add 1 to the tens counter, we add 1 to the carries counter. Now, when we're writing code, C doesn't really care about line feeds or tabs or spaces. But when we're writing code so that we can read it and so that other people can read it, there's certain conventions that we follow. And one is that the statements inside an if statement, right, inside this compound statement here, should be indented. It should be shifted over a little bit so that we can clearly see that these statements are meant to be conditional on this if. So these are inside here. So we open up a curly brace here, we shift over, we start writing our statements over here, and then when we're done, we put the curly closing brace in line with the if to show that this closes this if statement. It's just a convention, it's not required, but we will be requiring it in this class. It's a programming style issue. So what if I have something different that I want to do in the two conditions? So if the expression is true, I want to do this. If it's false, I want to do that. But I never want to do both things. So C provides the else clause to express that. So if expression, statement 1, else, statement 2. Okay? And again, these statements can be any statement. So I evaluate the expression. If it's true, I execute statement 1. If it's false, I execute statement 2. Here's an example. So I want to count the number of times that the value of x falls within the range of 0 to 9. And if it falls outside that range, I want to bring it into that range and then count that as well. So here's my condition. Right? This is a more complicated expression than we had before. We have two sub-expressions, x greater than or equal to 0 and x less than or equal to 9. And we combine them with a logical AND. So if both of these are true, then I know that x is within the range of 0 to 9 inclusive. So if that's true, I execute this statement, in range plus plus, close the statement. If it's not true, this is the alternative. If it's in range, I want to do this. If it's out of range, I want to do this. I set x to be equal to 0. I count the fact that it was out of range, and I close this statement. Notice my indentation here and here. The closing braces line up with the if. The else lines up with the if. This makes the code easy to read. And also notice that even though this was a single statement, I used the curly braces to make it into a compound statement. You don't have to do that. It's not required. But it's a good practice because if I think of something else that needs to be done in this case, I've already got the curly braces set up and I can add more statements into this section if I want. Now what if I have more than two alternatives? Let's say I have three alternatives. Well, because the statement over here, remember this was S2 before, can be any statement, well, it could be an if statement. So I can have these cascading if statements. And this isn't new syntax, but this is a sort of a special case that C supports directly. So if expression 1 is true, we do S1. Else, so if expression 1 is false, we go this way and we evaluate expression 2. If that's true, we do S2. If it's false, we do S3. We exit the inner if, combines with the outer if, and we're done. We can do this as many times as we want. We're not limited to 3 or 4 or 5, as many times as you want. Here's an example of some code that uses this construct. In this case, I'm looking at a character variable C, and I want to see whether it's within the range of lowercase g to lowercase p. So here's a case where we're using the less than operator. We're using a literal character instead of a numerical value. But that's fine because a character is treated like an integer. So if C is less than minus G, that means if the ASCII code that's in C is less than the ASCII code of G, or if the letter that's stored in C is alphabetically below lowercase g, then this is true. If it's true, then it's below our range. So we increment a counter that says too low. If that's not true, we go here. Well, the else part has another if, so now we evaluate this. If C greater than P, the letter P, then we increment the too high counter. If this is not true, then we go to this else, and if it's not too low and it's not too high, then it must be in range, and so we increment that counter.